Now, I hope that all of us here believe that we have, all of us, been created by God. Nobody here made themselves. Nobody here created themselves. We have, all of us, been created by God. And so, because He created us, it says that we belong to Him. He is the Creator. Jesus one time had a group of smart alecks try to puzzle Him with loaded questions, and in one occasion they brought to Him a coin, and they first asked Him, is it lawful or right that we Jews should have to pay tribute to Caesar? And they had already decided if he says yes, then they had an argument against him with the Jews. If he said no, then they could bring a case against him to the Romans. So any answer he gave, it was going to go against him. And Jesus said to one of the questioners, let me have a coin. And they handed him a Roman coin. And Jesus held the coin up and he said, whose picture or whose image is that on the coin? And they said, well, that's Caesar. And what did Jesus say? Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. In other words, if he has the authority to stamp his image on it, it belongs to him. Give it to him. And what was he saying? The Bible says we have all been what? Created in the image of God. So when God made us, He stamped His image upon us. And it is a message that we are not our own. We don't belong to ourselves. We belong to God who created us and made us. Now, when men make something, they have a purpose. They don't just, a guy doesn't build a house just because he likes sawing wood or laying bricks. He builds a house so he can, what? Spend it. Either to live in it or to sell it or to lease it. And whatever men make, whether it's whatever it is, the ultimate purpose is to spend it, to use it. Now, I won't take time to go into the whole reason behind creation. We could be here a long time. But I think for this occasion, I can suffice it to say that God desired a kingdom of beings who would derive their joy from worshiping Him by choice. Give them free will, give them the chance to worship, and His desire was that a kingdom of beings would worship Him and derive their joy from the worship of Him. And to create such a being, He had to introduce a plan. And the first step in that plan meant He had to invest. He had to spend. God Himself had to invest in this kingdom that He desired. And what was His first object of investment? It was His own Son. For God so loved the world that He sent His only begotten Son into the world. And Jesus Christ was invested. He was poured out to lay the foundation, to become what the Bible calls the chief cornerstone for this kingdom that the Father is building, this kingdom. But not only His Son, as God found created beings like Peter and James and John and those first disciples who were willing to lay aside their lives and to commit themselves, surrender themselves to Him, to His kingdom, to His will. God invested them. God used them. God spent them. They were invested. So to really simplify it, we might say that we are God's currency. Just as we use dollars and cents to buy and to trade and to sell, God's plan is to invest His created beings to fulfill His eternal purpose, this kingdom that He is eventually going to complete. Now, when it comes to the subject of God and us, on the one hand, we are authorities, or we try to be authorities, and that is how to spend God. I've been a publisher for decades, and I can tell you how to write a bestseller. I can put a bestseller right out tomorrow. All you have to do is write a book about how to spend God, how to use God, how to have God's blessing, how to get God's power, how to take God and use him to excel and succeed, how to harness his resources. And so people do write books like that. You can find them on the internet, all these books about how to harness the power of God, how to tap into the power of God. I saw one book, Atomic Power with God, through fasting and prayer. But you see, the problem is we don't understand God's economy, and we get, as the old saying is, we get the cart before the horse. Try to get a hold of God's power. Fast and pray and seek his face, implore him, and try to get his power and use it for yourself, and you'll usually run into a dead end, because that's not God's economy. But reverse the order. Instead of you trying to get a hold of God, let God get a hold of you. Instead of you trying to spend God and his power and his resource, surrender yourself, your life, your talent, your gift, your resource. Surrender to God. And here's the glorious truth. When God gets a hold of us, we get a hold of God. When God is able to spend us, and somehow in his economy, we begin to be able to spend God. You know, Jesus' way was always diametrically opposed to the way of the world. The world says acquire, accumulate, grab, hold, keep. What did Jesus say? Whosoever will seek to save his life will what? He will lose it. He who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, a lot of people would like to be spent by God, used by God, if they could be spent where they want, how they want, with whom they want. They'd love to be another Billy Graham. Oh, man, I'd love for God to use me and make me a Billy Graham. Or I'd love for God to use me and make me a great TV evangelist. I'd love for God to use me and make me the pastor of a big church. Oh, Lord, here I am, use me. But that's not God's way, is it? No. It's, Lord, I will very gladly spend and be spent. And when you pray that prayer, when you make that surrender, you do it unconditionally. Not where I wish to be, not what I want to be, but Lord, what you have designed for me. Your will, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Think of the Apostle Paul. And I like to bring him up when I run into some of these ultra prosperity preachers. The greatest missionary, the greatest theologian, the greatest of the apostles. And his life was one of just constant prosperity, wasn't it? There was never a problem in his life, no difficulties, no one opposing him, no sickness, no nothing like that, all victory, oh man, no, wait a minute. Shipwrecked how many times? Beaten how many? This is the guy who said in the word of our text, oh Lord, I will very gladly spend and be spent. And he made a total surrender to God. Here I am. And I'm sure he might have even when he made that prayer, thought, oh, you know, God is going to use me in some spectacular way, and I'm going to just be so blessed. And instead, he ends up with shipwrecks and beatings, and then finally he's in prison, and, you know, like Jesus. Jesus was a totally spent life. He said, foxes have holes. The birds of the air have nests. The Son of Man doesn't have a place to lay his head. His life was totally poured out. It was a constant life of giving, of spending, because the Father sent him. And he had surrendered his will totally to the Father. And there he is in the garden, in such agony that the writer says, sweating as it were, great drops of blood falling to the ground. Father, if there is any other way, spare me. If there's any other way, please, Father, don't spin me like this. And then he concluded, nevertheless, not my will, thy will be done. And God's will for his son was a cross. And the most ignominious type of death that any man could ever die, totally poured out.